was a sunny morning in Lagos, Nigeria, and the streets were alive with the usual hustle and bustle. The air was filled with the sounds of people talking, cars honking, and the occasional market vendor shouting to catch the attention of potential customers. Amidst this chaos, in a luxurious mansion perched atop one of the hills, a young woman named Ruth was waking up to a new day. Ruth, a 24-year-old maid, had come from a small village in the east. She had dreams of making it big in the city and helping her family back home. Her job in the mansion was a step toward that dream, but it wasn't as easy as she had imagined. The mansion was grand, with walls lined with expensive paintings and floors so shiny you could see your reflection. Ruth had never been in a house so big before. She worked for a billionaire named Emeka, a man known for his wealth, power, and charm. Emeka had a reputation for being kind-hearted to those who worked for him, but Ruth knew not to cross him. On that particular day, Ruth was in charge of cleaning the bathrooms. It wasn't the most glamorous task, but it was a job, and she knew she had to do it well. She grabbed her cleaning supplies, took a deep breath, and made her way toward the master bathroom. It was the most important room in the house, and Ruth knew that Emeka was very particular about it. He didn't tolerate any mistakes, and Ruth could already feel the pressure building in her chest. As Ruth entered the bathroom, she could hear a faint scurrying sound. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Rats. She hated rats. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been terrified of them. The sound grew louder, and Ruth felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that she was an adult now, that she couldn't let fear control her. But the scurrying sound was getting closer, and her hands started shaking. In a panic, Ruth glanced around the room. She wasn't sure what to do. Should she leave the bathroom and call for help? But the rats were close. They could be in the walls or even under the tiles. Without thinking, Ruth bolted from the bathroom, her heart racing. Her legs carried her out of the room, but in her fear, she didn't notice the direction she was running. And that's when it happened. Ruth, in a frantic rush, stumbled and found herself running straight into Emeka's private bathroom, the very place where he would retreat after a long, tiring day. She hadn't realized where she was until she heard the sound of the door slamming behind her. Ruth froze in the bathroom, her back pressed against the cold, tiled wall. She could barely breathe, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. The moment felt like an eternity, but she didn't dare move. The door creaked open, and Ruth held her breath. She knew the rules of the mansion. The bathroom was off-limits, and Emeka would not take kindly to anyone, especially a maid, entering it. But what could she do now? Her fear of the rats was still too strong, and she felt trapped. There was no turning back. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. It was Emeka. Ruth's stomach dropped as she realized that he was just about to enter the bathroom. The door opened slowly, and Ruth stood there, frozen with fear, praying that he wouldn't see her. Emeka's voice broke the silence. "What are you doing in here, Ruth?" Ruth's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell him that she had just run into his private bathroom in sheer panic, avoiding the rats? Her mind raced, but no words came out. Emeka stood there, staring at her with a look of confusion mixed with anger. Ruth had always tried her best to be respectful and hardworking, but this mistake could cost her everything. Emeka's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer, making Ruth feel even more exposed. "I'm sorry, sir," Ruth whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to. I was just—" Before she could finish her sentence, Emeka interrupted her, his voice cold and stern. "Explain yourself, Ruth. What is going on here?" Ruth swallowed hard. She had to act fast. But before she could gather her thoughts, Emeka's gaze shifted to the bathroom door, and his eyes widened in shock. Ruth could see the confusion and surprise in his expression. "What in the world is this?" he muttered, taking a step forward toward the door. Ruth's breath hitched in her throat. She was sure she had seen that door open, but was it just a trick of her mind? Had Emeka seen something? The tension in the air was thick, and Ruth could feel herself shaking uncontrollably. What was he about to find? Ruth wasn't sure how much longer she could stand there in silence. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. Emeka was not going to be pleased, and she had no idea how this would all end. Just as she was about to speak again, the sound of someone clearing their throat broke the silence. Ruth turned quickly, her heart racing as she saw the figure standing in the doorway. A tall man with a stern look on his face entered the bathroom. It was Emeka's business partner, Chisom. Ruth's heart skipped a beat as she realized that not only had Emeka caught her in his bathroom, but now Chisom was there too. What would they think of her now? How would they react? Would this be the end of her job, her chance to make a better life for herself? Emeka and Chisom exchanged a glance, and Ruth could feel the tension in the room grow even heavier. It was then that she realized just how deep in trouble she was. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, trapped between two powerful men. Emeka, her employer, and Chisom, his business partner. She could feel her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This was the worst possible situation she could find herself in. A mistake she had made in a moment of panic had now led to a confrontation that could cost her everything. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, and Ruth didn't know how to fix this. Emeka stood still, his eyes locked onto Ruth, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. His usual composed demeanor was replaced by a coldness that Ruth had never seen before. She had always admired Emeka for his kindness and generosity, but now he looked like a different person. Chisom, on the other hand, was standing a few steps behind Emeka, his gaze steady and unyielding. He didn't speak, but his presence made the situation even more tense. Ruth felt as if the walls were closing in on her. I'm sorry, sir," Ruth stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of shame and fear making her flush. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was scared of the rats in the other bathroom. I didn't know where I was running to." Emeka's gaze softened for a moment, but it was only for a second. He took a deep breath, clearly trying to compose himself. Ruth had seen that look before, the kind of expression someone wears when they are trying to suppress their frustration. But it didn't last long. "Ruth," Emeka said, his voice low but firm, "you've worked here long enough to know the rules. You do not enter my private space without permission. Do you understand that?" Ruth nodded vigorously, her heart sinking deeper. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again." Emeka's eyes softened, just a little, but he wasn't done. He glanced over at Chisom, who had remained silent this whole time. The two exchanged a brief, meaningful look, and Ruth could feel her anxiety climbing even higher. What were they thinking? What would happen next? Chisom finally spoke, his voice deep and calculated. "Emeka, maybe it's not worth making a big deal out of this. We've all made mistakes. Ruth is just a maid, and she's young. She was probably just scared. There's no harm done." Ruth couldn't believe what she was hearing. Chisom, the stern businessman who usually spoke in harsh tones, was speaking up for her? She glanced up at him in surprise, but his face showed no emotion, just the same calm, controlled expression that he always wore. Emeka didn't respond immediately. He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing the situation. Ruth could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him was angry, deeply angry, but another part of him, maybe the part that remembered how Ruth had always been diligent and respectful, seemed to understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emeka spoke. "You're lucky, Ruth," Emeka said, his voice softer now but still tinged with authority. "I'm going to let this go for now, but if this happens again, there will be consequences. Do I make myself clear?" Ruth nodded frantically, relief flooding through her veins. "Yes, sir. Promise. It won't happen again." Emeka didn't say anything else. He turned to walk toward the door, and Ruth let out the breath she had been holding. She hadn't been fired. She hadn't lost her job. She had a second chance. But just as she thought the tension was beginning to lift, Emeka stopped at the door and turned around, his expression darkening once again. "Ruth," Emeka said, his voice cold. You'll be cleaning this bathroom from now on. Don't let me find you in my private space again. Ruth nodded quickly, her stomach still in knots. Yes, sir. I understand. Emeka gave her one last look before he stepped out of the bathroom, leaving Ruth and Chisom alone. The door closed behind him, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Ruth's heart was still racing, and she could feel the sweat on her forehead. She wasn't sure what to do next. Was she still in trouble? Had she gotten off too easily? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Emeka wasn't the same man he had been just a few moments ago. Chisom finally spoke, breaking the silence. Don't think you're off the hook, Ruth, he said. His tone still steady but now laced with a hint of warning. You've made a mistake, and if you think this is over, you're wrong. Ruth felt a chill run down her spine. Was Chisom threatening her? Or was he just trying to make her understand the seriousness of the situation? She wasn't sure, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. I won't do it again, I swear, Ruth said, her voice trembling slightly. I was scared. Chisom stared at her for a moment longer, his gaze piercing. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Ruth standing there, alone with her thoughts. The room felt empty, silent, and suffocating. Ruth tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of what had just happened was too much to shake off. She had gotten away with it this time, but how long could she keep making mistakes? How long before Emeka and Chisom lost their patience with her? Just as Ruth was about to pick up her cleaning supplies and leave the bathroom, she heard a soft click. She turned, confused. The bathroom door had just clicked shut, and she could hear footsteps approaching from the other side. Her stomach twisted again, and she felt a fresh wave of panic rise within her. Had they come back? Or was it someone else? Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself. She couldn't be caught again. Not like this. She held her breath, waiting for what would happen next. Ruth stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of footsteps outside the bathroom door sent a wave of panic through her. Who could it be? She had no idea how much time had passed since Emeka and Chisom left, but the tension was still thick in the air. Was this another confrontation waiting to happen? Or had something else changed? Ruth slowly stepped back, pressing her back against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her eyes darted to the bathroom door, her ears straining to catch any hint of what was going on outside. The footsteps grew louder, and Ruth's stomach twisted into tight knots. She wasn't sure if it was Emeka or Chisom coming back, but something inside her told her that she wasn't going to get away with this so easily. The tension between them was still fresh, and she could feel the weight of her mistake pressing down on her shoulders. The door handle rattled. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. Was someone trying to open the door? She had to act quickly. Without thinking, she dashed to the side, quickly hiding behind the massive shower curtain that hung from the ceiling. She held her breath and waited. The door creaked open. Her mind raced as she tried to calm her panicked thoughts. Was this it? Was she about to face the consequences of her mistake? Her fingers gripped the edge of the curtain tightly as she leaned back, praying that whoever it was wouldn't notice her. The person stepped inside. Ruth could barely make out the figure through the small gap in the curtain. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Emeka or Chisom, but someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. Ruth? The voice called softly, almost as if they were looking for her. The voice was unfamiliar, but it was warm and kind, not the harsh tone Ruth had expected. The figure took a few steps into the bathroom and paused. Ruth held her breath, praying the figure wouldn't see her. She tried to keep as still as possible, her eyes wide with fear. Who was this? Why were they here? The figure took another step forward, then stopped right in front of the mirror. Ruth could barely make out the details of his face, but she noticed that his movements were calm and deliberate. He didn't seem like he was there to cause trouble, but Ruth couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gripped her. After a long silence, the man spoke again, his voice soft and soothing. I know you're there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk. Ruth's heart raced. Talk? What did he want to talk about? How did he know she was hiding behind the shower curtain? Please don't be afraid, he continued. I'm not going to report you to Emeka. I'm not even sure if he knows what's going on. But I need you to understand something. Ruth's curiosity got the better of her. She peeked out from behind the curtain, just enough to see the man's face clearly. He was older than Emeka and Chisom, with short-cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were dark, but they held a warmth to them that made Ruth feel a little less afraid. Who are you? Ruth whispered, her voice shaky. And what do you want with me? The man smiled, but it was a sad smile. He didn't answer her question right away. Instead, he took a deep breath and leaned against the sink, looking down at his feet for a moment. I'm someone who knows what it's like to make mistakes, the man said softly, finally meeting Ruth's eyes. I've been in your position before, hiding from consequences. I've been where you are, scared and unsure of what will happen next. Ruth felt a strange sense of comfort in his words, but she didn't know whether she could trust him. Who was this man, and why was he trying to help her? She had never seen him before in the mansion, and yet, there was something familiar about him, something that made her feel like he wasn't a stranger after all. I don't understand, Ruth said, her voice quiet. Why are you here? The man took another step forward, his face serious. I'm here because Emeka's not the only one who can help you. I know you're afraid of losing your job, but there's more at stake here than just that. You need to understand that. Ruth frowned, confused by the man's words. What do you mean? What's at stake? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over at the bathroom door, as though making sure no one else was coming. He took a deep breath, then locked eyes with Ruth once more. I'm Chisom's brother, he said quietly. Ruth blinked in surprise. Chisom's brother? The man nodded. Yes, I've been watching you, Ruth, watching the way you work so hard, even when no one is paying attention. You have potential, but you're caught in a web that you don't understand yet. Ruth's mind raced as she processed his words. Chisom's brother? That would make him an important figure in the mansion. Why hadn't she heard about him before? Why was he so interested in her? I don't know what you mean, Ruth said, her voice barely above a whisper. She still didn't know whether she could trust this man. The man took a step closer, lowering his voice. There's something you need to know about Emeka and Chisom. They're not who they appear to be. I've been working with them for years, but I've seen things that make me question their intentions. And now, I'm telling you this because I think you deserve the truth. Ruth was in shock. This man, who had just appeared out of nowhere, was claiming to know things about Emeka and Chisom, things that could change everything. She didn't know whether she should be grateful or terrified. But, why me? Ruth asked, her voice trembling. Why are you telling me this? The man's eyes darkened. Because, Ruth, you're caught in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. And you need to choose your next steps carefully. Just as he finished speaking, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall again. The man looked toward the door, his expression hardening. They're coming, he whispered, his tone urgent. You need to leave now before they find you here. Ruth felt her breath catch in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. Would she escape in time? What was going to happen next? Ruth's heart pounded in her chest as the man's warning echoed in her mind. They're coming, he had whispered urgently. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end, and panic surged through her. Every instinct told her to run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. She was trapped. The footsteps outside the bathroom door grew louder, growing closer with every passing second. She could hear the distinct sound of shoes clicking on the marble floor, sharp and deliberate. It was clear someone was approaching the bathroom. Ruth quickly glanced at the man standing before her, his expression now serious, as if he knew the gravity of the situation. Go, the man urged softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Hide, now. Ruth didn't have time to think. With a racing heart and trembling hands, she darted toward the bathroom's closet, the one place she could think of to hide. The man didn't try to stop her. He just stood there, watching, his eyes locked on her, as though silently telling her she had no other choice. Just as Ruth reached the closet, the bathroom door creaked open. She spun around, her breath caught in her throat. It was Emeka. Ruth's body froze. Her mind raced. Had he heard them? Was he coming to check on her again? She didn't know. All she could do was hold her breath, praying he wouldn't notice her hiding behind the thick curtains in the closet. Emeka stepped into the bathroom, his gaze immediately flicking to the shower area where Ruth had been earlier. He didn't seem to notice the man standing there, which made Ruth wonder if this was the plan all along. The man, standing near the sink, remained still, his eyes narrowed and his jaw set. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the chaos boiling in Ruth's chest. Emeka looked around the bathroom, clearly puzzled. The bathroom had been quiet a moment ago, but now there was a strange tension in the air, as if something had changed. "What's going on here?" Emeka asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "I thought I heard voices." Ruth's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea what to do now. She didn't want to get caught in this mess, but the tension in the room was unbearable. The man turned to Emeka, his face neutral but his tone calm. "Nothing to worry about, Emeka," he said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding. I was checking on Ruth." She was feeling a little shaken after the incident. Ruth bit her lip hard, willing herself not to make a sound. She could see Emeka's gaze flicker briefly toward the closet before returning to the man standing in front of him. Ruth knew it was a risk. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stay hidden. Emeka didn't seem satisfied, but he didn't press the issue. "A misunderstanding, huh?" He raised an eyebrow. "Well, just make sure everything's fine here. And Ruth, be careful next time. I don't want to see you in my bathroom again. Understand?" Ruth's heart raced. This was it. Emeka was leaving. The man nodded once, and Emeka finally turned to leave, walking out of the bathroom without another word. Ruth exhaled the breath she had been holding, her whole body shaking from the sheer intensity of the moment. She waited a few more seconds, just to make sure Emeka was truly gone, before she allowed herself to breathe normally again. But the relief was short-lived. The man stepped closer to the closet, and Ruth could feel his eyes on her even though she was hidden behind the shower curtain. "It's not over yet, Ruth," he said softly, his voice firm. "You've been given a second chance, but things are about to get much more complicated." Ruth didn't dare come out of her hiding spot yet. She could hear his footsteps approaching and could feel his presence just outside the closet door. Her mind was racing, her thoughts tangled and chaotic. What did he mean by complicated? What was going to happen next? She slowly emerged from her hiding place, glancing at the man who had come to her aid. His calm demeanor had returned, but his eyes were full of something darker, something Ruth couldn't quite place. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like there was more to his words than he was letting on. "You can't keep hiding in this mansion forever," the man said, his voice lower now, almost a warning. "You're caught in a dangerous game. Chisom, Emeka, and I, we're all connected in ways you don't yet understand. But that's about to change." Ruth felt the ground shift beneath her. What was he talking about? Was this a warning or something more? She didn't know what to think anymore. "I don't understand," Ruth said, her voice trembling. "Why are you telling me all this? What do you want from me?" The man looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed deeply. "I'm telling you this because I know what Emeka and Chisom are really like. They aren't the men you think they are, and you're caught in their web. But if you play your cards right, you can get out of this. I'm here to help you, Ruth." Ruth wasn't sure whether she should trust him. She barely knew this man, and yet, he was offering her something that seemed too good to be true. A way out. But was there really a way out? Could she really trust him? Or was she just getting deeper into a situation she didn't fully understand? Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed once more. This time, Ruth's stomach dropped. She turned to the man who seemed unfazed, his eyes narrowing. "They're back," he muttered, his voice cold. "This time, it's not going to be as easy. You need to leave. Now." Ruth's heart leaped in her chest. What did he mean by that? Was she going to be found out again? Was there no escape? The footsteps grew louder, and Ruth felt a rush of panic. This time there was no hiding. The man looked at her, and in his eyes, Ruth saw something she hadn't seen before. A warning. "I'll be back," he said, turning quickly toward the door. "And when I return, things will be different." Ruth didn't have time to think. She needed to act fast. Without another word, she turned and bolted toward the window, her mind racing. What was about to happen next? She didn't know, but she was about to find out. As she scrambled toward the window, Ruth could feel her heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know what she was getting herself into, but she knew one thing for sure. The game had just changed, and she was in deeper than ever. Would she escape in time, or would she be caught in the web that was closing in around her? Ruth's hands shook as she frantically tried to open the window, her heart racing. The sound of footsteps was now unmistakable, growing louder with each passing second. She had no time to think. She could hear Emeka's voice from the hallway, but it was too late to turn back now. She had to leave, even if she didn't know where she was going. The window finally creaked open, and Ruth squeezed through it, her heart pounding in her chest. She had escaped, but she didn't know where she was going. The mansion was massive, and she was on the second floor, far from the safety of the ground below. But she didn't care. She had to run. As Ruth leapt from the windowsill, she felt a sharp pain in her ankle. The ground hit her harder than she expected, and she gasped. But she didn't stop. She pushed herself up, her ankle throbbing with pain, and sprinted toward the back gate. Behind her, the mansion loomed, silent and ominous. She didn't know what would happen when Emeka or Chisom found out she had escaped. But at that moment, Ruth only knew one thing. She had to get as far away as possible. Would she find safety, or had she just made a dangerous mistake? Ruth's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted through the streets of Lagos, her mind a blur of fear and confusion. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay near the mansion. The pounding in her chest was deafening, and her injured ankle made every step feel like an eternity. The sounds of the bustling city faded into the background, replaced by the thundering of her own heartbeat. She passed through alleyways and narrow streets, her eyes darting around nervously. She couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. She had left the mansion in a hurry, leaving behind everything. Her job, the life she had been trying to build. But even though she had escaped the immediate danger, Ruth knew she wasn't truly free. She could feel the weight of the situation closing in on her. As Ruth rounded a corner, she came face to face with a familiar figure. Chisom. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him here, not like this. He stood in the middle of the street, his eyes dark and unreadable, watching her every move. Ruth froze, her body tense. How had he found her so quickly? "You can't outrun this, Ruth," Chisom said, his voice calm but full of warning. "You think you've escaped, but you haven't. You're still a part of this, whether you want to be or not." Ruth's mind raced. I had to leave. I couldn't stay there. You don't understand." Chisom stepped closer, his expression softening, but there was no warmth in his gaze. "I understand more than you think. You're in too deep now. There's no way out unless you trust me." Ruth's stomach twisted. Trust him? After everything that had happened? But there was something about Chisom's presence that kept her from running. Maybe it was the authority in his voice or the knowledge that he could easily make her life even worse if he wanted to. "What do you want from me?" Ruth asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Chisom sighed, his face unreadable. "I'm giving you a choice, Ruth. A choice you don't have if you keep running." Ruth stared at him, unsure of what to say. She wanted to run, to keep fighting for her freedom. But she also knew that escaping into the unknown might only lead her into more danger. She had no idea who she could trust anymore. Chisom stepped closer again, his gaze intense. "You don't have to be alone in this. I can protect you. But you have to listen to me, Ruth. You're not the only one who's been kept in the dark. The truth about Emeka and me, it's much bigger than you realize." Ruth's mind spun with questions, but she didn't know where to begin. What was he talking about? What truth? She needed answers, but trusting Chisom seemed like the last thing she should do. Before she could speak again, the sound of a car engine revved in the distance. Chisom's eyes flicked over his shoulder, and for the briefest moment, Ruth saw a flash of urgency in his expression. "We don't have time," he said quickly. "Come with me, or you'll be caught." Ruth hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Was this a trap, or was this her chance to escape once and for all? She didn't have time to think it over. She had to act now. She nodded, barely believing what she was doing. "Okay," she whispered. Chisom motioned for her to follow him. Without another word, he led her into the shadows, away from the busy street. Ruth had no idea where they were going, but she knew that, for better or worse, her life was about to change once again. Chisom led Ruth through winding streets, the city's noise slowly fading into the background. She followed him without question, her mind still racing with doubts. Where was he taking her? What was the truth he was talking about? Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control, but Ruth had no choice but to trust him. For now, they finally stopped at a small, unmarked building tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It looked out of place, too simple, too hidden for someone like Chisom. Ruth glanced around nervously, but he didn't seem concerned. Without a word, he pushed open the door and motioned for her to follow. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with a few chairs scattered around. A man sat in the corner, his face partially hidden in shadows, but Ruth could feel the weight of his gaze. Chisom shut the door behind them and turned to Ruth. "This is where it begins," he said quietly. "The truth, Ruth. The things you need to know." Ruth felt a shiver run down her spine. What had she walked into? The room felt heavy with secrets, and she suddenly wished she had never left the mansion. Before she could ask another question, Chisom stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Sit down. We don't have much time." Ruth hesitated but obeyed. She sat in one of the chairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The man in the corner didn't move, his silence hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "What truth, Chisom?" Ruth finally asked, her voice shaky. Chisom looked at the man in the corner. The stranger stood up slowly, his face now visible in the low light. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. "Everything you thought you knew about Emeka, it's all a lie," the man said, his voice cold and steady. Ruth's world shifted in that moment, and she realized that whatever was coming next, it was far worse than she had ever imagined. Ruth's heart raced as the man spoke. His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "Everything you thought you knew about Emeka, it's all a lie." She couldn't comprehend what he was saying. Emeka, kind, successful, her employer, was a lie? The thought felt impossible. She had always trusted him, admired him. How could this be true? The man took a step forward, his expression hardening. "Emeka is not who he appears to be. He's been involved in things much darker than you can imagine. Things that will change your life forever." Ruth opened her mouth to ask more questions, but before she could, Chisom cut in. "He's telling the truth. You need to understand, Ruth. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about something much bigger than any of us." Ruth's mind spun. She wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere left to go. She was trapped in a web of lies, and it was becoming clear that no one, not even Chisom, could be trusted. Suddenly, the sound of a car door slamming shut echoed from outside, followed by footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Someone was coming. Ruth's stomach dropped. Who else had they brought into this? Would she ever be able to get out of this nightmare? Ruth's heart hammered in her chest as the footsteps grew louder, drawing closer to the door. She barely had time to react before the door swung open, and another figure stepped inside. It was Emeka. Ruth froze. Her blood ran cold as his gaze locked onto her. There was no sign of the kindness she had once known. Instead, his eyes were hard, his posture tense, as if he were a completely different man. "You've made a big mistake, Ruth," Emeka said, his voice low and chilling. You don't know who you're dealing with. Ruth's mouth went dry. She was speechless, trapped in the small, dimly lit room with Emeka and Chisom, both men now looking at her with a strange intensity. Emeka stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You thought you could run away? You thought you could escape? Chisom stood by the door, his expression unreadable. Ruth felt like she was being suffocated by the tension in the room. What do you want from me? Ruth finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Emeka's lips curled into a slight smirk. What I want, Ruth, is for you to understand the danger you're in. This is only the beginning. The room felt smaller by the second, and Ruth could feel the weight of her decisions crashing down on her. Was there any way out of this? Before she could even process the danger she was in, the door slammed shut behind her, and everything went dark. Ruth's breath caught in her throat as the darkness swallowed her whole. She couldn't see, couldn't move, her mind racing with questions. Where had they taken her? Why had they locked her in here? The panic that had been building up for days now felt overwhelming, and the silence around her felt suffocating. Suddenly, a light flickered on, revealing a small, windowless room. It was bare, save for a single chair in the middle. Ruth blinked in confusion. This wasn't the place she had been in before. This was different. Was it a trap? The door creaked open, and Chisom stepped inside, his face serious. He didn't say anything at first, just studied Ruth with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. You didn't have a choice, Ruth, he said softly, almost apologetically. You had to know the truth. Emeka and I, this is bigger than you think. You've been tangled in something far more dangerous than you could imagine. Ruth looked up at him, her heart heavy with fear and confusion. She didn't know whether to trust him anymore. But Chisom's eyes held something softer now, almost regret. I didn't want this for you, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. But now you're in this for good. Ruth's world spun. There was no escaping now. There was no turning back. The door slammed shut behind her once more, and Ruth was left in the eerie silence of the small room, her fate uncertain, her future unknown. The game had changed, and she was trapped in the middle of it. As Ruth sat in the silent room, her heart racing, the door creaked open once more. This time, however, it wasn't just the echoes of the past that entered with it. The truth was finally catching up with Emeka and Chisom. They were arrested for their cruelty, and their reckless treatment of Ruth had led to their downfall. The court heard Ruth's case, acknowledging the emotional torment she endured. In the end, justice was served, and all of Emeka and Chisom's properties were granted to Ruth. With the weight of the past lifted, Ruth returned home, embraced by her family, and began a new chapter of her life, one filled with peace, love, and the happiness she truly deserved.